Grayson Pell walked his pregnant girlfriend up the center aisle of St. James Cathedral. As though the funeral were a gallery opening, he had been invited to headline. He had on the charcoal suit that Adeline had picked out for him 3 winters earlier, and he held Camille Doucet's hand, the way a man holds something he wants the room to notice. And when he passed within an arm's length of the casket where Conrad Marsh lay, he did not slow down. He nodded at the mourners. He found his pew. He settled in like a guest at a wedding. What Grayson did not know, what no one in that cold stone room knew, except Adeline and a 61-year-old estate lawyer named Maeve Sullivan, sitting 3 rows back with her hands folded in her lap, was that the will had already cleared probate counsel. The trust had already been resealed. Every door he believed he was about to walk through had been quietly bricked over, while he was busy deciding what tie to wear to the service. He thought he was watching the beginning of his wife's collapse. He thought the funeral was the first domino, and that within the year he would be standing in the lobby of a building, with his name finally on the lease. He thought the quiet woman by the casket would sign whatever he slid across a table, because for 7 years she had signed whatever he slid across a table. He had it exactly backwards. This was not where Adeline came apart. This was the last page of his story, and nobody had thought to tell him the book was nearly closed. She watched him from the front, near the casket, in a plain black dress and her mother's bracelet, and she felt something that surprised her by how steady it was. Not grief, though grief was there too, sitting patient in her chest like furniture under a sheet. Not rage. What she felt, watching Camille's hand rest on the swell of her stomach, and Grayson leaned to murmur something that made the younger woman almost smile, was recognition. The specific calm of a person watching a prediction come true on schedule. Her father had told her this would happen. He had told her in a kitchen in the East End, with a chipped mug in his hand, 11 weeks before the cancer took him. And she had filed it away the way she filed everything. And now here it was, walking up the aisle of a cathedral in a borrowed suit. Adeline Marsh had spent her whole life being underestimated, and she had finally stopped minding, because underestimation, she had come to understand, was a kind of cover. You could get a great deal done from behind it. Her name, to the people who thought they knew her, was just Addie. The reserved one, the one who sat at the quiet end of the table at dinner parties out in Leaside and listened more than she talked. She ran a small literacy program out of a church basement in Riverdale, 3 days a week, and she spent 2 more days reading aloud to kids in the oncology ward at Sick Kids. And she drove a 9-year-old Corolla with a cracked cup holder, and she bought her clothes at the Winners on Gerrard. Grayson's mother had once, at Thanksgiving, called her sweet, in the tone people use for a dog that does not bite. None of them, not Grayson, not his mother, not the smooth men he golfed with, had ever once suspected that Adeline was the only living heir to a fortune that cleared $290 million. Her father, Conrad Marsh, had built it over 41 years, starting with 2 leased container trucks running between Halifax and St. John, and ending with a logistics network that moved freight up and down the eastern seaboard, plus a tangle of commercial real estate in Toronto and Montreal that he held through a quiet ladder of numbered companies and family trusts. His name was on no rich list. He had turned down 3 different magazine profiles. He drove himself everywhere in a Buick that he refused to replace. The day you announce your money, he used to tell her, is the day you hand strangers the script for how to treat you. Keep the money quiet and you keep the script. He had started teaching her this before she was old enough to spell the word fortune. By the time she understood it, she had already collected enough evidence to know he was right. Her mother, Rosalind, had died when Adeline was 8, a fast, ugly leukemia that ran its course in 14 months. Adeline had sat by the hospital bed in the last stretch of it and watched the monitors and held her mother's dry hand, and learned something most kids her age were nowhere near learning yet, that the world was breakable, and the people who came out the other side were the ones who paid attention. She paid attention after that, to everything. She watched the way her father's partners changed their posture when he walked into a boardroom. She watched a girl at school start sitting with her. The week after that girl's father met Conrad at a hockey fundraiser. By the time she was 16, she could tell the difference, almost on contact, between someone who liked her and someone who liked the gravity she sat next to. By 20, she was sick to death of running the test. By 23, she told her father she wanted to live for a while as a person nobody had a reason to perform for. He understood completely. He had wanted the same thing once, before the money got too big to set down. So he helped her build it. a modest apartment off the Danforth, a salary from the literacy program that covered rent and groceries, and not a dollar more. No cards tied to the trust, no name on any list that would draw attention. She kept Marsh because it was common enough to hide behind. The only thing she let herself keep was a thin platinum bracelet, engraved on the inside with her mother's initials. It was worth maybe $4,000. To Adeline, it was worth more than the entire ladder of numbered companies. Her father had given her exactly one rule for the experiment, and he gave it to her at the airport the day she moved out. "You'll know the right one," he said, "because they'll never once make you feel like you owe them an explanation for being quiet. The wrong one will always need you louder than you are." She carried that rule into a packed bar on Ossington on a Friday night 3 years later, when she was 26 and tired, and her shoes hurt, and a good-looking man with a confident jaw bought her a drink and asked her 3 questions about herself, before he started talking about himself, which at the time had seemed like a generous ratio. Grayson Pell sold the version of himself that he wished were true, and he sold it well. He was a director at a mid-tier wealth management shop downtown, the kind of role that sounds enormous until you learn how many of them there are. He spoke about markets with a borrowed authority. He dropped client names at parties. He believed, down in the foundation of him, that success was a matter of looking and sounding successful long enough for the substance to catch up on its own. He looked at Adeline and ran the math that men like Grayson always run. Pretty, quiet, agreeable, wouldn't compete with him, wouldn't crowd him out of any room. A wife who would make the picture of his life look finished, without ever asking to be the subject of it. She watched him for a year before she married him, the way she watched everyone. How he talked to the server when the order came out wrong. How he handled the flight to Montreal that sat 3 hours on the tarmac. How he described women who weren't in the room. The results came back mixed but not damning. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't a liar, not yet. He was shallow in a way that she, worn out from years of detecting deeper, subtler frauds, mistook briefly and expensively for honesty. A man this easy to read, she let herself believe, had nothing hidden in him. They married in the 2nd year, a small ceremony out at a winery in Niagara, which Adeline planned down to the napkins, while Grayson contributed enthusiasm, and a guest list made entirely of people he wanted to impress. The marriage settled into its real shape inside 18 months, and its real shape was this. She ran everything, and he lived inside the result. She paid the mortgage, out of her literacy salary, and a small clean investment account that was a crumb, off a crumb of her actual holdings, structured by her father, so that nothing visible ever connected to the trust. She paid the bills, carried the insurance, booked the dentist, ordered the firewood for the cottage, signed the Christmas cards from both of them, chose and wrapped the gift for his mother every birthday, and let it be from both of them. She kept the entire machine of their life running so smoothly that Grayson genuinely seemed to believe the smoothness was the natural temperature of the universe. He managed nothing. He came home to a clean house and a hot supper and clean sheets, and a wife who asked how his day went and meant it, and who over 7 years he never once thought to ask in return. He lived inside her labor the way a man lives inside a hotel, using everything, considering none of the people who made the bed. Her father came by every 6 weeks or so. He drove himself, in the Buick, and sat at her little kitchen table on the Danforth, and drank coffee out of the chipped mug she kept just for him, and asked her careful, unhurried questions about her work and her marriage in the way of a man who had spent 4 decades reading people across negotiating tables and knew that the fastest way to get a true answer was to look like you weren't waiting for one. He had never liked Grayson. He'd never said so outright. But Adeline knew her father's silences least the way an old sailor knows weather, by what sits underneath the calm. 3 years into the marriage, on a gray October visit while Grayson was downtown at the office, Conrad set his coffee down and said a thing she would carry for the rest of her life. "A man who never asks where the money goes," he said, "is either very trusting or very sure he'll always have a key to the door. The first kind's rare, the second kind's dangerous." She didn't answer. She knew when her father was building towards something. "Grayson has never once asked you a single question about how this house runs," he went on, turning the mug a quarter turn on the table. "Not one. That means he thinks it'll always run for him. And when a man thinks that, he stops seeing the person who runs it. And once he stops seeing her, Addie, he starts looking somewhere else." She filed it. She kept managing. She kept watching. It took 18 months for her father to be proven right, and it announced itself, the way these things do, on an ordinary Tuesday morning over a credit card statement. She wasn't snooping. She was paying the bill, the way she paid it the same morning every month. A charge she didn't recognize. A restaurant in the financial district she'd never been to. Dinner for two, $190 and change, on a Thursday, when Grayson had told her he was at a client dinner in Mississauga. She held the page for a few seconds. Set it down, paid the bill, made his eggs, went to work. She didn't say a word. She started a file. Over the next 6 weeks, she built it the way her father had taught her to build anything that mattered, slowly, completely, without leaving prints. Charges at restaurants and a hotel on Front Street that never came up in conversation. Gaps in his calendar. A phone left charging on the nightstand one night while he showered, holding a thread of messages with a contact saved as Q3 pipeline that had nothing whatsoever to do with any pipeline. The woman was Camille Doucet. 29, an associate at a competing firm originally from Moncton, the kind of confident that comes from learning early that beauty is leverage and spending it without flinching. The affair had been running about 4 months when Adeline found the first thread, and by the time she finished documenting, it had crossed 6 months, and Camille was pregnant. Adeline learned about the pregnancy from a receipt. A baby boutique on Queen West. Soft little things, $140, charged to Grayson's card, dated 3 days before their wedding anniversary. The anniversary he had forgotten. She sat in the Corolla in the church basement parking lot with the receipt in her lap and felt something shift in her, low and structural. Not heartbreak exactly. More like the sound a house makes when a beam that has been carrying the weight for years is finally pulled out. The house doesn't fall right away. It just starts, very quietly, to lean. She called her father that night. "I know," he said, before she'd finished her first sentence. "How long have you known?" 5 weeks. My people flagged it in a routine review of the household accounts. She closed her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to find it in your own hands. If I'd told you, you'd have spent a year doubting it. Now you don't doubt anything. You know what you know, and you know what comes next." "What comes next?" He was quiet a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the weight of a man who had spent 40 years keeping assets away from people who hadn't earned them. "Nothing. You change nothing. You let him believe every day is exactly the same as the last, and you let me build the thing that's going to protect you when the time comes. When he brings it. Men like Grayson always do. They always push it a little further than they need to, because they're sure they're smarter than the system. So let him run, and when he's run far enough, the leash catches." She hung up. She went inside. She made supper and set the table and asked Grayson how his day had been and laughed at the right places. And she said not one word about the receipt folded in her jacket pocket, or the file on the encrypted drive, or the phone call that had just set in motion, something he could not have imagined in his most paranoid hour. Her father gave the next 14 months to building a wall around her future. He restructured the trust. Assets that had drifted into joint adjacent vehicles over the years got migrated, quietly and completely, into structures that moved only on her signature alone. He had every title reviewed, every account audited, every thread that might connect her hidden wealth to her married life identified, and either cut clean or reinforced with so much legal scaffolding that a team of lawyers would need months just to find the edges of it. And he did one more thing. He had his people watch Grayson. Not interfere, just watch. What they watched was a man who, emboldened by a wife who seemed to notice nothing, started getting reckless. Grayson moved money out of their joint savings into a personal account without telling her. He changed himself to sole beneficiary on a life insurance policy that had named them both. He started taking quiet meetings with a family lawyer about how marital property gets divided in Ontario, under the impression that his wife had no idea. He was planning. He was positioning himself 3 moves ahead. He simply had no notion that the board belonged to somebody else, and that somebody else was writing every move down. Then Conrad Marsh was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. The same disease that had taken Rosalind 26 years before. They gave him about 4 months. He used them down to the last week. He finalized the trust. He sat with Adeline 3 separate afternoons, hours each time, handing across knowledge and authority and positioning that would activate the moment he was gone. He brought in Maeve Sullivan, the lawyer who would execute the estate and stand as Adeline's counsel from then on. And he read the file on Grayson one final time, and in his own slanted hand, he wrote a single line across the top of the cover page. "He'll come for the money at the funeral. Let him come. The door's already locked." Conrad died on a Wednesday morning in late September, in a private room at Princess Margaret, with the window open a crack to the city noise, because he had asked for it. Adeline was beside him. She held his hand. She watched the line on the monitor go flat. She breathed. Then she stood and straightened her sweater and walked out to the hallway where Maeve Sullivan was waiting with a briefcase and a face arranged into nothing but readiness. "It's done," Adeline said. "I know. Everything's in place. He can't touch a dollar of it. He doesn't know that yet." "No," Maeve said. "He doesn't." Adeline looked back at the room. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, found the small engraved letters with the pad of her thumb. "Let him come to the funeral," she said. "Let him bring her. Let him have his afternoon." Maeve had practiced estate law for 31 years and seen grief come in every shape there was. She had never once seen it arrive as this, a kind of total architectural calm. "And after the funeral?" she asked. Adeline turned back. The look on her face was the look of a woman who had spent 7 years being underestimated, and had used every single one of them to get ready for exactly this. "After the funeral," she said, "he finds out who he married." The service was on a Friday, the kind of raw Toronto autumn day, where the cold gets into your coat and decides to stay. Close to 200 people came. Old freight partners, foundation people, the quiet, substantial men and women, who had known Conrad as a man of weight and discretion. Adeline stood near the casket receiving condolences with a composure she'd been training since she was 8. Pale, dry-eyed, carrying something nobody else could see the shape of. Grayson arrived 40 minutes in, and he did not come alone. Camille walked beside him in a slate-gray dress that did nothing to hide the 6-month curve of her. Chin up, hand in his, walking into the funeral of Adeline's father, as though somebody had reserved her a seat. The room felt it. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. That particular thick silence of 200 people deciding, all at once, not to say anything. Grayson stopped 3 feet from Adeline. He didn't let go of Camille's hand. He looked at his wife with an expression he'd built to read as sympathy, with something underneath it that was nothing of the kind. Satisfaction. The quiet pleasure of a man who believes he is watching someone's power drain out of them in real time. "I'm sorry about your dad, Addie," he said. Adeline looked at him. She looked at Camille. She looked at their joined hands. She looked back at him. "Thank you for coming," she said. Level, even, the voice of a woman ticking a box on a list. And she turned to the next person in line, and she did not look at Grayson Pell again for the rest of the service. He read it as defeat. He read the calm as shock, and the silence as surrender, and the whole performance confirmed for him everything he had always believed, that she was small and soft, and not built to fight. He was making the final miscalculation of his adult life, in a cathedral, in front of 200 witnesses, and he had no idea. In the 3 weeks after the funeral, Grayson accelerated, exactly the way her father said he would. He moved out, didn't announce it, didn't discuss it, simply stopped coming home, into a 1-bedroom on the waterfront that Camille was renting. When Adeline texted to ask where he was, he answered with one line. "I think we both know this is done." He instructed his lawyer to file. He wanted the house in Leaside. He wanted half of whatever Conrad had left. He wanted it fast and clean, and he believed, with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never once been told no by a woman he considered beneath him, that she would simply comply. And he did the thing her father's people had predicted to the dollar. He reached into the joint investment account, the modest one she kept with her literacy salary and a trickle of clean dividends, and he transferred $58,000 into his personal account. No conversation, no consent. He did it because he believed the account was marital property, and therefore half his by right. He did it without the faintest idea that the account was monitored, that the transfer was logged the second it cleared, and that moving jointly held money during pending divorce proceedings is the kind of thing that his own lawyer would later describe, in a voice scraped clean of all professionalism, as staggeringly stupid. Adeline watched all of it. From the house he thought they owned together, which was, in fact, titled to a trust he could not reach. From the kitchen table, where she read Maeve's encrypted updates over her coffee, she watched with the patience of a woman whose father had taught her that the most dangerous opponent in the room is the one who lets you run until the leash snaps tight. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't argue, didn't plead. The silence was total, and it was deliberate, and it was the loudest thing Grayson Pell had never bothered to hear. Maeve called 3 weeks after the funeral. He moved the money. How much? $58,000. Personal account. No authorization. Adeline closed her eyes and touched the bracelet. That's what my dad said he'd do. Your father was rarely wrong about people. And Adeline, in Ontario, inheritance is excluded property. It's not part of the net family property. It's not subject to equalization, as long as it's never commingled. Your father kept it cleaner than clean. There is no door here. There was never a door. And the 58,000? Dissipation of marital assets. During proceedings, with documented intent, he'd already met with counsel, combined with the changed beneficiary and the undisclosed consultations. We have a clear pattern. When we sit down across the table, he won't be negotiating from strength. He'll be negotiating from a hole so deep his own lawyer will tell him to take whatever we offer and say thank you. Adeline opened her eyes and looked out the window at the garden. Her father had helped her dig 3 springs ago. The perennials were cut back for winter, the soil already hard. But the roots were deep, and they would hold. Set the meeting, she said. It happened on a Tuesday morning in November, on the 22nd floor of a tower on Bay Street, in a glass conference room that looked south to the lake. Mahogany table, leather chairs. That specific, expensive quiet that lives in rooms where large amounts of money change hands. Grayson got there first in his best suit, navy, and, for reasons he could not have named if you'd asked him, the tie Adeline had given him for their 5th anniversary. His lawyer was a high-asset divorce man named Desmond Vane, who had assured his client, more than once, that this would be straightforward. Desmond Vane had not yet seen the folder in Maeve Sullivan's briefcase. He did not yet know that the woman he was about to negotiate against earned $51,000 a year reading to children, and was also the sole beneficiary of a trust, worth more than $250 million. Desmond Vane was about to have a genuinely terrible morning. Adeline came in at 9:15, in a black blazer over a white blouse, no jewelry but the bracelet, hair pulled back, her face arranged into the same nothing it had worn for 7 years. She looked to Grayson the way she had always looked, quiet, containable, his. Maeve came in behind her, silver-haired, 61, carrying herself like a woman who had spent 3 decades winning the cases other lawyers called unwinnable. She set her briefcase on the table and did not smile. Grayson leaned back in his chair, easy, a man at a formality. Addie, you look well. She didn't answer. She sat. She folded her hands. She waited. Desmond Vane opened with practiced efficiency, laying out his client's position. The marriage had broken down. His client sought an equitable division of the matrimonial assets. The family home, the joint accounts, and any inheritance received during the marriage from the estate of the late Conrad Marsh. He put weight on that last part. Any inheritance received during the marriage. He said it like it was the center of the whole thing. Like it was the prize, and everything else was wrapping paper. Maeve listened to all of it without one interruption. When he finished, she opened her briefcase and took out a single folder and laid it flat on the mahogany. Thank you, Mr. Vane. Before we discuss any division, I need to correct a few factual matters about the actual shape of this marriage. Desmond nodded. Grayson shifted, just slightly, in his chair. The home on Rumsey Road. Mr. Pell believes it's jointly owned. It is not. It's titled to the Marsh Family Trust, established in 2013, 8 months before the wedding. Mr. Pell's name appears on no title, no mortgage, no document of any kind. He has been, in the eyes of the law, a guest in that house for the length of the marriage. The room went still. It took Grayson a few seconds to feel it land. The joint account at the bank, Maeve went on evenly. Mr. Pell moved $58,000 out of it into a personal account on October the 31st, without his spouse's knowledge or consent, after he had already retained Mr. Vane. That establishes intent. Under the Family Law Act, that's dissipation. We have the transfer, the timing, and the intent, all documented. Desmond Vane's pen stopped moving. The life insurance policy, originally naming both spouses, was changed by Mr. Pell on the 14th of September to name himself as sole beneficiary, undisclosed. We have the original and the amendment. She turned a page. She looked directly at Grayson, and her gaze had no warmth in it at all. Now, the estate of Conrad Marsh. Mr. Pell appears to believe his wife came into a modest inheritance that's open to division. I need to correct that. She set a second sheet on the table. 1 page, a summary of the trust's primary holdings. The estate, held in trust, is valued at approximately $291 million. Logistics and freight operations across 4 provinces in the eastern United States. Commercial real estate in Toronto and Montreal. Controlling interests in 2 operating companies. The trust predates the marriage. Its assets have never been commingled with marital funds. Under Ontario law, inheritance kept separate is excluded property. It does not form part of the net family property. It is not subject to equalization. It is, in the most complete sense available, not yours. The silence in that room was a physical thing. Desmond Vane stared at the page, his face running a fast sequence of recalculations, none of them landing anywhere he wanted to be. Grayson stared at his wife. His mouth had come open. The confidence that had carried him into that room, the certainty that he held the cards, the assumption that the quiet woman across the table would take whatever terms he handed her, drained out of his face like color, out of a photograph left too long in a window. 200 and... He stopped. He swallowed. $290 million. Adeline looked at him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence, the silence he had spent 7 years reading as nothing, was finally showing itself for what it had always been. The quiet of a person who doesn't need to announce her power, because her power was never built for an audience. And, Maeve continued, given the documented misconduct, the unauthorized transfer, the altered beneficiary, the undisclosed consultations, Mrs. Pell's counsel will be filing for full recovery of the dissipated funds, plus costs. Mr. Pell's exposure, conservatively, is north of $130,000. Desmond Vane set down his pen. He turned to his client with the specific exhaustion of a lawyer who has just realized his client lied to him about every single thing that mattered. Grayson, we need a minute, privately. Grayson didn't move. He was still looking at Adeline, searching her face for the crack, for some sign of the wife he thought he'd had. The soft one, the manageable one, the one who never fought back. He found nothing. Her hands stayed folded. The bracelet caught the light off the lake. You knew, he said, hoarse, this whole time. You knew everything. She looked at him for a long 3 seconds. When she spoke, it was the same voice she'd used for 7 years. Calm, unhurried. I knew everything, Grayson. I knew about Camille. I knew about the money. I knew about the lawyer, the insurance, every dinner, every hotel, every lie you told me, while I made your breakfast and paid your bills and ran your entire life from a room you never once looked into. She paused. My father knew before I did, and he spent the last year of his life making sure that the day you finally showed me who you really were, you wouldn't be able to walk out the door with a single thing that was mine. Grayson's hands were flat on the table, fingers gone white. You brought her to his funeral, Adeline said quietly. You held her hand in front of his casket. You looked at me, and you thought you were watching me break. She stood. She picked up her bag. You were watching me finish. She turned and walked to the door, and Maeve gathered the pages with neat, unhurried hands and followed. At the door, without turning around, Adeline spoke over her shoulder, her voice carrying clear across the dead quiet room. The locks at Rumsey Road change Friday. Your things will be boxed and sent wherever you tell Maeve's office. The joint accounts are frozen pending the dissipation claim. Goodbye, Grayson. The door closed behind her. His life came apart after that with the patient inevitability of a building losing its footing. The waterfront condo was Camille's, and the income that had paid for the dinners and the suits was suspended within a month when his firm ran a routine compliance review, saw the dissipation claim in his mandatory disclosure, and walked him out without his access card. The $58,000 got flagged by the court. His card started declining at the exact pace his lifestyle had been built to outrun. Camille did the arithmetic that winter. She was 29 and pregnant, and the man on her couch at 2 in the afternoon. No house, no job, no firm, watching the business channel with the hollow face of someone whose bluff has been called all the way down, was not the package she had signed up for. She told him on a Thursday, no drama, that they wanted different things, and that he should probably find somewhere else to be by the weekend. He sat in his car in her parking garage for the better part of an hour. He had no house, no job, no wife, no girlfriend, no money he could reach, and no reputation left to trade on. Every surface his life had been resting on for 7 years had quietly been removed, and underneath them there was nothing, because there had never been anything. The substance had always belonged to somebody he'd never bothered to see. Adeline stepped at last into the life she'd spent 7 years folded up inside. She took the chair her father had left her on the board of the Marsh Foundation and widened its work from literacy into housing and into bursaries for single mothers going back to school. And she funded the expansion herself, $40 million over 5 years. The Globe profiled her in the spring, under a headline about the heir nobody in this city knew they had. It didn't mention Grayson by name. It didn't have to. He saw her, the following winter, on his way to an interview at a firm a third the size of the one that had let him go, in a coat that needed pressing, carrying a resume he'd rewritten more times than he could count. There was a transit ad on the side of a streetcar shelter on King, the Foundation's awareness campaign, and on it was a photograph of his ex-wife at a podium, composed, lit, looking out over the city with an expression he had never once seen across 7 years of marriage. Certainty. He stood on the corner in the cold and looked at it for a long time while people stepped around him. And he understood, finally and completely, that he had spent 7 years living inside a structure built by a woman he had never bothered to learn the shape of, and that he had mistaken her quiet for emptiness every single day, and that the mistake had not been one mistake but the whole architecture of his life, raised on contempt for the person who was holding it up. The light changed. He crossed. The streetcar pulled away and took her face with it. Adeline spent that next summer at the cottage in Muskoka her father had bought 30 years before and never sold. Small, plain, cedar gone silver, ringed by birch and quiet. One morning in July, with the lake flat as glass and her coffee going cool in her hands, she opened the encrypted folder on her phone, the one she'd kept for 2 years. Every receipt and timestamp and screenshot, the whole patient record of everything Grayson Pell had done. She scrolled it once, slowly, the way you walk through a house you've already moved out of, checking each room, not because you forgot anything, but because you want to be sure nothing's left worth carrying. Then she selected it, and she deleted it, and when the phone asked her to confirm, she confirmed, and the screen went clean. Not because she had forgiven him. Forgiveness wasn't the point, but because the file had done its work, and to keep it any longer would be to keep carrying him. And she was finished carrying anyone who'd never been worth the wait. She set the phone face down on the dock. She looked at the birches moving in the wind and at the water, and she thought about her father, and the rule he'd given her at the airport about the right person and the wrong one. She hadn't found the right one yet. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't, but she had found the thing he'd never quite promised her and maybe hoped she'd find on her own. That the quiet ones aren't empty. They're full. So full they were never going to make noise just to prove it. And when the world finally learns to look at them properly, it isn't because they changed. It's because everyone else finally bothered to see.